Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of The Kettle. I'm Registered U.S. Editor Abram Pilch, and I am joined today by Tobias Mann, our Register Systems Editor, and Richard Speed, our Microsoft Ecosystem Reporter. And we're going to talk about some really exciting new developments in AI hardware and in changes to Windows 11 that have been long overdue. So let's get started. This is thankfully a quieter week than usual, maybe because we're nearing the end of August and we don't have to talk about the AI bubble popping or any kinds of economic disaster. We can actually talk about some new technological developments and geek out over those, which is a lot more fun. Uh, so one thing that we've noticed is that a lot of companies seem to be moving away. A lot of AI companies seem to be moving away from traditional GPUs and are looking at different types of hardware. Uh, and Tobias, I know you've covered this in a bunch of stories. Specifically, I wanted to get started by talking about Cerebras. Uh, and can you tell everybody a little bit about Cerebras and what they do?
Sure. Cerebras has been around for quite a while. They've been poking at the AI infrastructure problem for a lot longer than large language models have been the dominant force in all of this. The company, founded and led by Andrew Feldman, kind of differentiated itself pretty early on by rather than building GPU size chips, their chips are the size of like dinner plates or charcuterie boards. And this has given them an early advantage during the Chat GPT days up until recently because they can pack, they're not reliant on high bandwidth memory, which is supply constrained. And instead, their chips are so large that they can pack 44 gigabytes of super fast petabytes a second SRAM on it, which has made them, starting around 2024, they launched an inference server that allowed them to um, serve tokens way faster than any GPU on the market. Doesn't matter how many GPUs you stack together, they could serve the model faster. Um, However, they did have some challenges associated with the amount of compute that they had. Um, and a big shtick for them was that they could get more compute out of their chips using something called structured sparsity. It takes advantage of the number of zeros that are in the training sets. And while that's great for training models, it doesn't do anything for inference. Um, you would think that that would have been a dead end for them, but they have found a path forward by partnering with other companies to do the compute heavy side of inference for them. Uh, Earlier this year, they partnered with AWS for this purpose. And just last month, they partnered with AMD. Feldman is notoriously not a fan of Jensen Huang or NVIDIA. Uh, he previously labeled NVIDIA as an AI arms dealer for continuing to push to sell GPUs into China. And so there's been this shift away from trying to do everything on one kind of chip, a GPU or custom AI accelerator, to distributing it across the two. Um, if that weren't enough, we were getting towards the end of the life cycle for Cerebrus's last chip. And just this week, we got a glimpse of what its next generation is going to look like.
So, what is the difference with the next generation of Cerebras?
Well, the biggest differences come from the rack architecture. Um, these chips are huge. They're super power hungry. The last generation one was 15 kilowatts just to power the chip. To put that in perspective, modern NVIDIA GPUs pull about 1.2 kilowatts. So they're all quite a bit hotter. They used to be placed in these big monolithic the chassis. Think of a server that's like half a rack tall, liquid cooled. Had all of everything that you needed to deploy it, though, in that one box. But as it turns out, data center operators don't really like operating like that. They would prefer to be able to interchange the power or cabling and compute interchangeably. And so, what we've gotten this generation is, with the CS4 systems, is a rack scale system that includes three chips in a modular fashion, so that if a compute unit goes bad, the customer only has to swap the compute. They are not also replacing all of the power delivery equipment um, as well. Another big improvement with this generation is that the power delivery is so much better that Cerebras has doubled the clock speed on its chips. It's calling them a turbo variant, but in reality, what they're doing is pushing twice as much power through them. So they've been able to double the performance. They've been able to double the bandwidth of the memory. They've been able to double the I/O speed, and so they're effectively getting twice the compute out of the same silicon, and they put three times as much in the rack.
Who's going to use Cerebras?
Okay, so this is an interesting question because it has changed a little bit since Cerebras launched their inference service in 2024. At the time, Cerebras was mostly going after customers that needed to generate what are called premium tokens in the industry. It's a really silly way of saying, hey, I can generate hundreds or thousands of tokens a second, where a GPU system with maybe 6 dozen GPUs might only be able to do a few hundred per user. This is beneficial for things like coding assistance. And one of Cerebrus's largest customers to date was OpenAI. When OpenAI launched their Codex Code Assistant, they also launched a Spark model that ran specifically on Cerebrus hardware because of how quickly they could generate tokens. Now, fast tokens are great for code assistance, but fast tokens are also cheap tokens. Uh, the faster you can generate the tokens, the more work you can get done in a second, and so it drives down the cost of operating the hardware and how much you have to charge in order to drive a profit from them. And so, um, end of last year, NVIDIA acquired Grok for $20 billion. And the entire purpose was Grok did something very similar to Cerebras, was able to achieve hundreds of tokens a second for things like coding assistance. Uh, but by combining them with NVIDIA GPUs, uh, NVIDIA was going to be able to do that for thousands of users, not just a handful at those speeds. So it's high volume, high speed. The rest of the industry didn't have an answer to this. And so Cerebras has positioned themselves as the alternative to NVIDIA Grok for everybody else in the industry. And so AWS is one of the major partners for doing this. So expect to see services built atop of AWS's AI services to rely heavily on Cerebras. I would also expect to see um, AMD, as they're starting to sell their own new rack scale system that we looked at back in Advancing AI last month. I also anticipate we're going to see AMD pushing it as a kind of two-part deployment option to its customers in order to drive those higher speeds for premium tokens, but also drive down the operating cost of running inference services like Base 10 or Fireworks or any of these other AI as an service providers.
Makes a lot of sense. So we also see that Google is moving away from traditional GPUs, or at least they're getting another partner to help them with their TPUs, correct?
Yeah, so that also happened this week. So a little bit of context here is that Google is a cloud operator. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody at this point. Every sufficiently large hyperscaler eventually ends up in this business. Um, Google's customer base, therefore, has long consumed traditional GPUs, And since right, I think it was 2015 that Google started developing or introduced its own custom AI accelerators called tensor processing units, TPUs, primarily for internal workloads. This is also a thing that we've seen with a lot of cloud providers. That is that as a as they scale up, many of them have advertising businesses or recommendation systems for search traffic, where it's beneficial for them to have something that customers don't necessarily want as much of. Um, the open secret, though, is with all of these custom cloud accelerators, CPUs, etc., is none of them are really built from scratch. Um, Google has lots of talented chip engineers, but there's a lot of stuff that goes into a AI accelerator or CPU that is just boring. And if you put a bunch of engineers on that stuff, you're really just reinventing the wheel. And so these cloud providers have relied heavily on big IP houses like Broadcom in order to design the boring bits of the chip so they can spend most of their time designing the fun stuff, the stuff that's going to make them money, either serving advertisements or powering AI services, as is the case with Google. Uh, as I mentioned, Broadcom was that partner for Google. Um, and that was publicly disclosed as part of an Anthropic deal. Broadcom started getting rather loud about the fact that it is the infrastructure or the IP provider for a lot of these chips. They also provided IP for Meta as another example, where that was also publicly disclosed this year. The sea change this week was that Marvell is now getting involved in all of this. Marvell is another IP house that has largely built its holdings through acquisitions of companies like Cavium. I believe Innovium is also in there, if my memory is serving correctly. They bought Celestial AI for photonics connectivity end of last year in a rather large multi-billion-dollar deal. And so Marvell has long been a competitor to Broadcom in the networking space, but Broadcom is a massive monster of a company. There's a reason we call them Broadzilla. And so their IP holdings are massive. Marvell has reached a point where it's now competitive. It has IP for custom XPUs. So Google could go to Marvell and said, "Hey, can you design us a TPU? We're asking Broadcom to do the same thing, and then they can choose which performs better." And so this is, I think, where this is going is that as anybody who's followed Broadcom for long enough, once they have an effective monopoly, prices tend to go up, licensing fees tend to go up, and we saw this with VMware not too long ago.
So Google's getting in on the action of or doing more to get custom silicon. And now we find out that even our robotaxis are getting special silicon, which I don't understand why they need it. Perhaps you can explain because we know that Waymo is now uh, designing some custom silicon.
Yeah, this was one that I wasn't expecting this week. Waymo came out of the gate and um, disclosed that they had developed a custom machine learning accelerator. You can call it an AI ASIC if you want, specifically for autonomous vehicles. Um, this is a market where there is no shortage of off-the-shelf options from companies like Intel Mobileye, Qualcomm, NVIDIA, AMD. Um, Basically, if you want to build a robotaxi or an autonomous vehicle, you don't have to look very hard to find something that you can use to build this. And so we have seen companies like Tesla go down this road, but Tesla is a massive electric vehicle company that has made a lot of inroads through its technological design and innovation around things like full self-driving. It's less surprising to see it there. Waymo is a lot smaller, but also arguably a lot more successful in getting robotaxis on the road that actually work and are legal and you know have actual potential of getting you where you belong. Though getting stuck in a roundabout is also always a hilarious sight to see when you do see them rolling around. Um, for Waymo, the problem that they're trying to solve is that all of these cars have just a tremendous amount of sensor data streaming through them. And there's very, very little time between seeing, say, an obstacle on the road and taking evasive action in order to avoid it. And a robotaxi, you, while Waymo can have a human uh, pop in and take control of the vehicle, well, that is not an ideal situation if you're hurling down the road at 30 miles an hour and somebody steps out into the road. By the time a human can take control, it's too late. And so latency is a big factor in all of this. How quickly can it see it and then, you know, tweak the wheel to go around it, hit the brakes to stop and avoid it. Um, and so Waymo has decided to build this chip. Uh, Abram, you mentioned the why, and this was something that we were discussing just yesterday about why would they need this, and given that there's so much off the shelf stuff, and it had been working for them. Um, and from what I can tell, they have been largely building these autonomous systems using FPGAs. FPGAs are fantastic for super low latency workloads. They're entirely programmable, but they're hard to program for. It's a very specialized group of people who can program for them, and they're not very compute dense. So if you want to add more sensors, you start having to add more FPGAs to the compute stack in these vehicles. That consumes more power, and it compounds your development maintenance stack. And so I suspect what Waymo's motivations for moving towards an ASIC in this case is that they could get better compute density that's also easier to work with from a development standpoint without missing out on the low latency characteristics that FPGAs are infamous for. There's a reason that basically all high frequency trading is done through FPGAs today. If you want to be able to take action very quickly based on a stimuli, they're really good for that. But ASICs can be just as good if they're designed for that purpose.
Makes a lot of sense. So I think what we're seeing here is that there's more diversity of hardware going into inference, going into the AI industry so that we can get better power management, better performance, maybe better economics, easier to program. So a lot of interesting things happening here that are moving outside of the domain of just the big hardware companies that we normally expect, like Nvidia. So, speaking of big companies and things we expect of them, I wanted to shift gears a little bit and talk about Windows 11, which is almost 5 years old now, and yet it still can't do some of the things that Windows 10 and Windows 7 could do, like let you move your taskbar. So I wanted to ask you, Speedy, about the taskbar because I read that we might actually be able to finally move the taskbar after 5 years. Is that true?
That is true. Yeah. I mean, full disclosure, it's never bothered me personally, taskbar being on the bottom, but for some users, they really care about this. And it's one of the things that Microsoft removed. It was in Windows 10, as you say, it was in Windows 7. And yet, inexplicably, when Windows 11 arrived, well, it's almost 5 years now, they've taken it away. And the reason for that was they basically rewrote the interface and they decided to drop some things, and one of the things they dropped was moving the taskbar, and users have complained about it ever since. Um, what's interesting and what I think it demonstrates, because it is now coming back, it's arrived in the release preview channel of the Windows Insider program, which means it should be out publicly in the next few weeks, months, maybe, but it's there now. It's been in the Insider channel for a while. It's been through experimental, through beta, but now it is in release preview. Um, but what I think it speaks of is Microsoft is paying attention to users once again, because this has been a thing people have been asking for. They didn't ask for Copilot everywhere. They didn't ask for ads everywhere. They just wanted to move their taskbar around like they always used to. And so finally, that's happening. I mean, it kind of echoes comments that came from the Windows boss Pavan Davuluri, and my apologies if I pronounced that name wrong. I did my best. But earlier this year, he said that Microsoft would be rethinking how they put Copilot into things. They'd be rethinking things like the taskbar, and that the fact that users wanted to work a certain way, they'd be rethinking the start menu. They'd be paying more and more attention. And I think when your boss, in this case, Satya Nadella, is telling investors that the company needs to win back its fans, clearly it understands that there's an issue here. So, yeah, as of now, in the release preview channel, you can now move the taskbar left, right, top, or bottom. You can make it smaller. You can adjust the start menu as well, make that smaller or larger too. So it's all customization. I think one of the concerns I've got is it's taken Microsoft 5 years to get to this point, which is a bit of a worry.
Well, listen, I think they get no credit. I give them zero credit for doing this because if you take something away from someone and then you take 5 years to give it back to them, you don't deserve a pat on the back. Like they created a situation where they could pat themselves on the back for giving you something that they took away. Now,
Yeah,
I don't really like you. I don't really care that much about having the taskbar on the top or the side. I'm happy to have it on the bottom of the screen, but they took away a choice from me for no apparent reason. I know it's the code, but you know what? That's not my problem, right? That's their problem. They wrote the code in such a way that they overrode users' choice, a choice that people have had. I mean, how long have you been able to move the taskbar? I
I mean,
feel like it goes back
years.
to 95, does it?
Yeah, it goes back years. I mean, what I think we've seen, I mean, I think there's two aspects to this. The first aspect is obviously the concern about how long it's taken. From my perspective, it's like there's been 5 wasted years. People have complained about this. Why is it taking so long to actually do this? Yeah, as you say, they don't deserve a pat on the back. They deserve to be a well about time too. But you have wasted time before this went in, putting in things that users perhaps weren't that concerned about, like the adverts, like Copilot everywhere. Um, the but it's also, I think, the company is recognizing there were certain things that it did do right in, say, Windows 10. A good example is the right-click context menu, which is now in the experimental channel. Now, there, they've actually come out and said, you can reuse your Windows 10 muscle memory here because we're going to allow you to customize it and make it work more like how you're used to. And I think that's really good. They're doing that. But I think it's a real shame it's taken them so long to actually do this. And I mean, I'd recommend anyone who's got a sacrificial PC to have a look at the new context menu because it actually works, hate to say it, really well. They've done a good job, I think. It's gone in the right direction. It's just, I wish they'd gone in that direction 3 or 4 years ago before inflicting their design choices on the public, which I think perhaps weren't that keen and they didn't seem to be able to listen to the reaction.
Yeah, I
how
mean,
much
I
of this
really I'm sorry, Tobias, you were gonna say?
Yeah, I was gonna say, how much of this do you think is motivated by the fact that when Windows 11 came out, there wasn't a tremendous amount of industry competition? Macs were still rather pricey. Um, Linux was an enthusiast's game and filled with compromise. 5 years into Windows 11, that situation seems like it's changed quite a bit with, memory prices have driven up the cost of every PC to a level that, unless you have a large supply chain that can help you avoid some of that cost, everything's expensive. And so Macs are a lot more competitive price wise than they used to be because Apple's supply chain is just better than most PC manufacturers. As well as on the Linux side of things, um, you know, there's Steam, which has basically made one of the you know stalling points for Linux adoption with gaming a non-issue for the most part, and so it seems genuinely like Microsoft has to start investing in a platform that it thought was just kind of a monopoly.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. There are echoes of Internet Explorer, for example, which again, Microsoft owned the internet browser space for a long time until obviously Chrome came along and ate their lunch. Um, I think what's probably happened is they've looked at the adoption of Windows 11, and it hasn't gone well. I mean, Windows 11 was released. Microsoft made certain hardware requirements as well as part of the Windows 11 experience. And if you look at the current market share, Windows 11 it's stalled. You know, even though Windows 10 is now out of is now out of support, you've got to be on the ESU program to actually get any support at all now for Windows 10. People are still using it. People still like it. And I think what's happened at Microsoft in the last year is they looked at this and thought, okay, we might have made a mistake here, or the people in charge have kind of refocused where they're going, thinking, okay, so what is it? What's stopping people moving from Windows 10 to Windows 11? And yes, I think definitely there's more choice now than there used to be. I think Linux and macOS are good choices, and we're in this frankly bizarre situation now where Apple hardware is often the cheap option, which is I still can't believe we how we got here. Um, but I think ultimately Microsoft is realizing that people, hey, we liked how Windows 10 worked, and why did you change it? So they're going back. My concern is again how long it's taken them to realize that. And I mean, Windows is a super tank. It takes a long time to turn that super tanker around. I think we've got another year or so before they get back to where they were. At which point, I would say, that they've lost 4 or 5 years of time, which I think is a real shame. But I'm happy to see what's happening.
So I do wonder how many things that are old are going to be new again. For example, the wallpaper. I know this is really petty, but hey, these are the things people look at when they go to your desktop. The wallpaper in Windows 11, the default wallpaper is hideous. Yeah. And I think people look at that and are like, you're even ashamed that it's Windows because it doesn't say Windows on it. You used to have the Windows logo, used to be like proud of your Windows. Now they've got some kind of weird paper mache flower that looks like it's wilted. I mean, and then they got rid of some of the special effects that people like, people like Windows 7 because it had the arrow start menu. So I wonder whether we're going to see a new version of Windows, like a Windows 12, and people will like it because it'll just bring back some of the visual elements and some of the choices that people had in 7 and 10.
Oh, yeah, I think so. I mean, I think we'll certainly see, again, I've got no information here on this, but I think we'll certainly see more options to say, make this work more like it used to before. In fact, we've seen that, I think today we saw an announcement in Microsoft's Message Center about Outlook, where you can make new Outlook look and feel a bit like Outlook Classic, which is it's a small thing, but it's as bad as you're about to say, it's cosmetic, but it's what people want. It's what people want. They prefer to have things work the way they're used to, the way they're happy with. There's no need to change things just for the sake of change.
Well,
Well,
that's why Windows 11 has been such a pain because Windows 11, when it started, was just change for the sake of change. Now
Yeah.
we've got new features like AI piled on top of it. But like, was there really any evidence that we need to have the start menu in the middle of the screen? Or was that just a look, let's show you that we can make it different move?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I think you're right. Things like rounded edges on Windows, there were a lot of very cosmetic things with Windows 11, and again, over the last few years, I think Microsoft has come to realize that, hey, maybe things worked okay before and we didn't need to change this stuff. But just feels like a lot of wasted effort to get to this point.
is this any different than what we saw in, say, the late '90s with the transition from Mac OS 9 to OS X, which was so divisive that Apple had to ship both operating systems on those machines, and I think for the initial period was actually shipping Mac OS 9 as the default. Or the other one that this makes me think of is the transition from Windows XP to Vista, which I recall as being heavily influenced by the stiffer hardware requirements, but even that's kind of reminiscent of the TPU requirements on Windows 11. Uh, it seems like this isn't as a dramatically, a departure, as dramatic a departure from Microsoft's playbook in the past. It seems like maybe users have lost interest or just are struggling to adapt.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it's I would say in this instance, users probably have lost interest because Microsoft reached the point, I think, certainly with Windows 10 and with Office, where it did everything you needed it to do. So why would you need to upgrade? And if I was cynical, I would say that with Windows 11, there was probably a demand from the hardware partners that, hey, people need to buy some new PCs. And it's like, well, here's Windows 11. It's like, yeah, but it works fine on Windows 10 hardware. Why should we buy more hardware? Oh, but you need to have this special security chip. And so users will then force to buy new PCs or new devices. Um, and as you say, there wasn't a whole lot of difference apart from the visual stuff initially with Windows 11 and Windows 10. Since then, there's been a lot more AI put into it for sure. But again, it's debatable as to whether or not there is a killer AI application on the desktop yet. I mean, you mentioned driverless cars, so that's a great example of a really good AI application. But on the desktop, I'm not sure there is one yet, and that I think is a problem Microsoft is also facing as well. With the users saying, "Well, I mean, there's nothing here that I absolutely have to do my day-to-day job."
Yeah, I mean, I remember last year I wrote an article about the things I think Microsoft should actually do to improve Windows. Now, I'm sure they won't do any of them, but I was thinking of things that would actually be good for power users. I guess that's my bias here. Like having a second or third clipboard, I think would be built into the OS would be a big deal. Maybe adding another modification key in addition to the Windows Control Alt and Shift keys, because all the keyboard shortcuts seem to be taken up by something. So we could use like another key combination that we could use for more keyboard shortcuts. I feel like there are things that they could do to really make this operating system more friendly to an audience that knows what they want, is getting more and more power users because people have been using Windows for 30 years now. They don't need to make it simple. They need to make it powerful. And they're more interested in pushing ads and AI at you and then changing the UI just to make it look like they did something and get you to buy a new computer because they upgraded the hardware requirements. So I
Yeah,
don't know. I feel like Windows 11 has been the reason why people are switching to it is because they're annoyed. They're annoyed that they're being pushed to get new hardware that they don't want to get. They're annoyed that they're being pushed to deal with these slightly different UI when the old UI worked fine, and that they're having things like AI and ads pushed at them. But
yeah.
hey, speaking of AI being pushed at them, I understand that the new task manager is going to better keep track of when your AI is being used. Is that right?
Oh yeah, yeah. Again another thing Microsoft pushed quite hard this week was a task manager. Now, I mean, I'm very old, and I can remember when Task Manager first appeared back in the days of Windows NT and stuff, and it was all very exciting. And it was I think Dave Plummer who wrote it initially. He called it a stone cold killer because it was great. It would just kill processes. It did one thing really well, and that was you could see what was going on and it could kill stuff, and it was great. Whereas over the years, it's just got again, you could almost take it as a metaphor for Windows. It's got bigger and bigger and does more and more things, which maybe you don't want. And the latest thing is you can now look at you can get more visibility into AI workloads. So as well as seeing how hard your NPU, and that's I think it's the neural processing unit, I think it's called. Tobias, if you
Yeah,
correct
yeah.
me there, you can see as well as seeing how hard that system is working full stop. You can now drill down and see which processors are using it, and the goal there is to see, okay, well, I've got a process here. It should be using the NPU, but in actual fact, it's using a CPU and GPU, and therefore it's burning up much more power. It's
Uh-huh.
far less efficient. So it does make sense from that point of view. However, as I was reviewing this, I thought to myself, well, is this really what I want Task Manager to do? I just want it to basically be a very lightweight, very simple tool where I can see what's running, what's stalled, and what's crashed, and kill it. And that's all I wanted to do. If I want to see what's happening internally, I want to use a tool like maybe I don't know, Performance Monitor or some inspection tool to actually see what's going on in my system. So I kind of I'm torn about this because it's always good to see these tools being developed and being enhanced, but I'm not sure it's the correct place to put that kind of process monitoring information. I want Task Manager to manage tasks, and that's it.
I don't really have a problem with this personally. I I like seeing what my CPU and my GPU and now my NPU are doing. So put it in a place where it's easy for me to keep track of. That's fine. I don't have to look at it. I mean, I think that's a separate tab for the NPU. So you don't have to click on it. I don't see this as a huge problem as long as I'm able to see my tasks and kill my tasks and see, I want as much information as possible at, at my fingertips about what my computer is doing. So, speaking of things being at your fingertips, I want to thank both of you for coming on and talking about this week's important topics. As always, we will have lots of information at the register at your fingertips, talking about Windows, talking about AI hardware, talking about security, and all the other things that we do to be the hand that bites IT. We look forward to seeing you all next week.